Hi, welcome back to the Progressive Primitivist, where we believe the only way to go forward in religion is to go back to the Bible. The topic of marriage, divorce, and remarriage within Churches of Christ is a very controversial topic, and James Bales is often heralded as the false teacher on the issue within Churches of Christ. On February 21st, 1981, there was a notable meeting between preachers in the Memphis area at the Harding Graduate School, and James Bales took questions from the audience. Many who have attended the Memphis School of Preaching have heard stories from Garland Elkins and Keith Mosier as to what happened that day. Both men were able to ask questions there on the floor at the Harding Graduate School. Here's a brief clip of them talking about that.
There are many men who have fractured the church, put themselves and their followers into eternal jeopardy because of the false doctrines they've taught on marriage. I knew Brother James Lee Bales, and we were friends. When he was in the hospital, I visited him. I do not remember the details, but I'm almost certain we had a prayer. But the time came when he came to Memphis to speak about his theory, and it was a man-made theory. We met at Harding Graduate School, and there was an overflow crowd. I know Brother Taylor was there, Brother Mosier was there, and maybe others of you were there. We remember this exchange that Brother Bales and I had that day.
On that day at the graduate school, I was able to ask Brother Bales a question. In his book, Not Under Bondage, in the preface, he said he was absolutely sure about everything in that book. But on page 65 of the book, he said he wasn't quite sure about the point he was making. So I asked Brother Bales which time he was right, when he was sure or when he wasn't. And he laughed at me and said, "Have you ever written a book?" And I said, "No, sir." And that ended that particular discussion.
What you're about to hear is audio from that meeting where Garland Elkins and Keith Mosier were able to ask questions. Now, not all questions are included. The audio is very old, and so we were only able to get about 40 minutes of it. But we think it's worth a listen. Enjoy the video.
We believe everybody is going to be a Christian gentleman. Now we want to set out on the front end that we don't want to confine the questions to one or two people. We want everybody to ask questions whenever they're recognized. And so Brother Bales has said that he will not speak, lecture, and then answer questions. He just wants to answer questions. Most everybody knows his position, has read his material. And so that's the way he agreed to do it, and I think that's great. That's fine. Brother Bales is a Christian gentleman. He's my friend and my brother, and I'm sure that all of us will be delighted to enter into this discussion with him. So we're going to begin with just questions, and let's confine it to one question. Let's don't ask a half dozen questions at one time, one standing. Let's ask one question, and then Dr. Bales will address that question. We'll ask another. Who's first? Back in the back, brother.
How does 1 Corinthians 7, 10, and 11 apply to marriage, divorce, and remarriage? 1 Corinthians 7, 10, Paul said, "I say, yet not I, but the Lord." The Lord had already given charge in this matter. Paul refers to something that had been revealed by the Lord before this. He said that they were not to depart, and the word there is for divorce, but if they departed, they would remain unmarried or be reconciled. So he's referring, I believe, to Matthew 19:9, but he does not give the ground for divorce and remarriage, because evidently that was not in the question. The question evidently has whether or not the two Christians are to continue in marriage. And I say two Christians because if someone wants to quiz me about that, I'll be glad to. So he's referring to the Lord's deliverance in the pastoral ministry. The Lord had stated that there were some things he had taught, but there were other things that we taught by the Spirit. And I believe in 7:12 to 15, Paul gives some additional revelation. Next question.
I'd like to ask you a question. You said the word used in 10 and 11 was for divorce.
Mm-hmm.
The two words you used, charizo is used to divide,
Mm-hmm.
and then the word for divorce.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's the difference in the two words?
Well, it is also used for divorce. They're both used for divorce. The Lord said they weren't to put asunder in, or rather he's talking of the original marriage law in Matthew 19:6. So I think you'll find that some even say that the term was a technical term for divorce.
Brother Alfred. No more questions? Yes, Brother Alfred.
Brother Bales, of course, that's already been stated. Everything that I will say will be said in love, as I think you know. But I want to ask you two or three questions, perhaps in one. Number one, am I not right in your contention that Matthew 19:9 says nothing other than two Christians that are married. That it says nothing to two non-Christians that are married,
Yes.
or to a Christian married to a non-Christian.
Yes.
All right, in view of that, I think that therefore you cannot use that on a mixed marriage in 1 Corinthians 7. I think I know what your reply will be, but what would your reply be to that? And then I have another question on that.
I do not refer to Matthew 19:9 to justify a mixed marriage. In my book, Not Under Bondage, I appeal to Paul justifying a mixed marriage in 1 Corinthians 7:12. Well, Peter also did it in 1 Peter, the 3rd chapter.
Well, what about, are you saying that Paul modified, or it was an extension of Matthew 19?
No. Well, yeah, Paul shows that Matthew 19 is limited to a certain category. In other words, I believe on that, just as Tom Warren believed up till 1978 in his book Charts, as I recall, page 213, that in 1 Corinthians 7:10, Paul is speaking to a believer married to a believer.
Let me ask you this question. In John 3:5, an accepted sentence.
Mm-hmm.
Verily, verily, I say to the accepted man to be born of water and spirit cannot enter into the kingdom of God.
Mm-hmm.
In Matthew 1-9, there is an exception sentence. And the word whosoever is used there, universal term in both instances. Now then, how would you argue in John 3:5 that a Baptist preacher, nobody else, can set that aside with something else from John 3:5 if you take the position? Matthew 19:1-9 is not the complete will of God on the matter of marriage for all men, universal application.
I'm glad you asked that question. Well, Warren maintains in his book, Keeping the Lock in Wedlock, that an accepted sentence cannot be further modified without contradicting the sentence. And a modification would be a contradiction. Well, first of all, this is not true. How shall you spoil a strong man's house except you bind him? Well, the Lord isn't saying there somebody couldn't shoot him, that it couldn't be an inside job, that they couldn't do it when he was away on vacation. Paul said, how would anybody understand except he interpret? And he didn't mean by that no one else could interpret. Now, furthermore, an acceptive sentence tells you what the whosoever can or cannot do. An acceptive sentence does not within itself give you the scope of the whosoever. Now, on John 3:5, first of all, there is an exception to John 3:5, as far as I understand it. First of all, we know when the Lord said, except one be born of water and the Spirit, he wasn't talking like the Mormons say of Adam. He's speaking of the new covenant. As far as I've been able to find out, none of my brethren believe that the apostles were born into the kingdom of heaven during the personal ministry, because it had not yet been established, nor do they believe the apostles were baptized on Pentecost. So there's an exception. But Matthew 19 has a passage that relates to it, 1 Corinthians 7, 10, 11, that you cannot parallel with reference to John 3. If there are other passages of Scripture that show that in John 3 that Jesus, who at that time was talking to a Jew, had reference to the new birth as essential for a Jew to enter the kingdom, and there was later revelation that showed that it did not apply to the Gentile, I would accept the later revelation. But there is no such later revelation. In Matthew 19:9, there is later revelation. Paul said the Lord spoke to the two in 7:10, and that he, Paul, spoke to those involved in the mixed marriages.
I'd like you to address yourself to the question, though, that I raised. I'd like for you to show us why a Baptist preacher is wrong when he says there's something more or different from John 3:5. How would you go about showing that?
I've already stated that I think maybe you don't agree that the apostles were an exception to it.
I'm talking about
Now, all right, second. I said that if there is a passage that parallels 1 Corinthians 7 to deal with John 3, I would say, okay, John 3 is limited. There is no such passage, Brother Elkins. And so, therefore, I do not accept the limitation that the Baptist places on John 3:5, but I do accept the limitation that Paul takes on 1 Corinthians, in 1 Corinthians 7:10, 12 to 15.
I maintain they're exactly parallel. Now then, understanding your position, that you say that Matthew 19:1-9 does not apply to anybody outside, any non-member, then taking that for, assuming that, then that means verses 4 and 5 would likewise not be applicable, where Christ said, For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. First it said, have you not read that he who made them in the beginning made them male and female, and said, for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife. And then goes on with the other issue, as you will. So now are you saying that in Matthew 19:4 through 6, that Jesus is not even giving the universal law for marriage?
Yes, I say that. There is confusion, and it was manifested in an article that had a good spirit, 2 articles in the Gospel Advocate. And I'd like to assure you that the fact that I have not appeared in the Gospel Advocate in reply to any criticism of my position is not due to a vow of silence upon my part, nor as one brother suggested that someone in an act of mercy should take away my typewriter, nor have I been stunned to silence. I'm not permitted to reply. Now, in Matthew 19:1-9, there are 3 laws. There's the law the Father gave in the Garden of Eden. Second, there is the law of Moses. And third, there is the law of Christ. And to confuse 3 laws which are different is, as I've stated, is confusion. Jesus was asked by the Jews, is it lawful for a man to put away his wife? On what grounds is it lawful? Jesus said, have ye not read? And then he appealed to passages in Genesis concerning male and female. He made them. He made man and woman for marriage. And then he referred to Genesis 2:24. Jesus is appealing to the original creation law, the law given at creation. What I mean is at the time that marriage was instituted. Now, we know he is talking not about his law, nor about Moses' law, for he said, have you not read? Christ had no law which they could read at that time. And furthermore, in 19:8, he said, from the beginning it hath not been so. He's talking about divorce had not been so from the beginning. In Matthew 19:4-5, Jesus states the original marriage law, and then in 4 and 6, he draws a conclusion which is inherent in the original marriage law, and that is what God had joined, man was not to put asunder. That Matthew 19:4-6 is Jesus' reference to the original law of creation. I don't have time to read the quotations, didn't bring them all with me, just brought the references. But several people in the book called Your Marriage Can Be Great recognize that this was referring to the law given at the beginning. For example, Bill Collins, page 340, Hanson, page 420, Tom Eves, page 351, Jack P. Lewis, page 410 and 416-17, Conley, page 506-539, McGarvey in the Fourfold Gospel, Harold Hazlip in the Aberdeen Christian College Lectures, page 166, 1979, J.D. Thomas in Divorce and Remarriage, page 7 and 8, Roy H. Lanier, Marriage, Divorce and Remarriage, page 3 and 4, Max Deaver, Your Marriage Can Be Great, page 71, and Clyde M. Woods, page 119. Jesus gave the original marriage law. There was no divorce permitted in the original marriage law. There was no reference even to the remarriage at the death of a spouse. In fact, when first given, neither sin nor death existed. The second, they said then, why then did Moses? He said, because of the hardness of your heart. Then he gave his law. And this parallels the statement in Matthew 5:32, and I say unto you. Now, Christ's law is Matthew 19:9, and then they raise questions, and he goes on through 12. But those are 3 different laws. Matthew 19:6 is a no-divorce law. You can't get, when applied, as some brethren say, Matthew 19:6 is applied in Matthew 19:9, you can't take a no-divorce law and apply it and get out of it a divorce law.
Isn't it true that Jesus endorsed the original law, put it back in the beginning? They say to him right in that Moses suffered give a writing of divorcement. And he said unto them, Moses, for your hardness of heart, suffered you to put away your wife. But from the beginning it had not been so.
That's right.
And I say unto you, he added one additional thing, only one reason for separation, divorce, and remarriage, because of fornication. And I say unto you, whosoever. I don't think your explanation is adequate on this whosoever in John 3:5. Whosoever putteth away his wife except it be fornication shall marry another committeth adultery. And whoso marrieth her which is put away committeth adultery. I think, with all due respect, that your assertions there do not prove anything at all.
Whosoever is often limited. Whosoever to compel you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. That doesn't mean when a kidnapper compels you to go 1, you volunteer to go 2. Matthew 5:31, when Jesus said, whosoever was to divorce to give her a right into divorcement. That was obviously referring to those in the covenant. But back to Matthew 19, there are three laws there. And Christ, although marriage, I believe marriage has existed from the beginning. God never sanctioned sex out of marriage, but that doesn't mean he held man to the high standard regulating marriage that he held him in Genesis 2:24. So when he said, I say unto you, he gives his law, and his law permits divorce. The original law did not. It's a modification of the original law.
Let me reply this before I sit down. This matter of whosoever is limited to people who marry. Of course, it's limited to those whosoever marry or puts away his wife. That's the only way it's limited. Just like John 3:5 is limited, it's a universal statement, but anybody who will obey the gospel, obviously it doesn't apply to those who do not obey the gospel. Let's not take too much time. Let me mention one other question. I want to ask you, what is the difference in your so-called law of the heart, which I deny the Bible teaches? Romans 2:14 talks about the work written in the heart. It's not the law of the heart. I'd like to know the difference in your so-called law of the heart and the Mormon so-called latter-day revelation of Joseph Smith and the Catholics and others. In my view, they're all in the same category. If I understand you're taking a position, I don't know what you're saying intuitively, a person has that kind of law, or how you're saying it comes about. But I deny that your explanation that is true. I'd like an explanation of that.
Now let me get back to whosoever.
Let's let him answer this, then we'll let Keith answer.
Whosoever. First of all, Brother Elkins will limit it. I will expand it. He won't limit it. He'll expand it. One brother said this is too ridiculous to mention, but he didn't tell me why. I want you to take Matthew 19:9 and get authorization for any woman to put away her husband on any ground and remarry. It's not there. It's talking all the way through about a man. A man. And the only place you find expressly about a woman, it's forbidden. Mark 10:12. And 1 Corinthians 7:11. So then, brethren who will not limit it, they say, and they can't change it, whosoever expand it. Second, Brother Thomas Warren maintains that the whosoever is limited. He says on Pentecost, those who were divorced and remarried under a previous law did not have to break up their marriages. Mac Deaver, who teaches on the Bible faculty of Tennessee Bible College, said that up to AD 62 or 63, that anyone up to that time and who had not yet had access to the gospel was not amenable to the law of Matthew 19:9. And so then he would have people up to AD 62 and 63 that were not included in the whosoever. Now concerning the work of the law in the heart. I mean by it, if I understand it rightly, exactly what Brother Roy Deaver meant when in the Freed-Hardman lectures in 1974, he stated that God will render to every man according to his works. But his works in relationship to what? Answer, in relationship to the law in which he lived. Again, that to which the Gentiles was obligated is Romans 1:18 to 32. There never has been a man or group of men independent of amenability to divine law. The great moral law is written and embedded in the very nature of every human being. But on page 284 he said, the Gentiles, not those in the Christian dispensation, will be judged by the law written in their hearts. I mean by the law written in the hearts what he means by the law written in the hearts before Pentecost. I mean by what Brother Warren means by it when he debates the atheists. Now in Brother Warren's debate with Mattson, his key chart, for example, is found on page 273 and elsewhere. God reveals, and this is quote, God reveals himself to man, unquote. Then I put the word through because that's what he's talking about. Quote, general revelation. The world, man. That's general revelation. Then, quote, special revelation. God reveals. Now that's present tense. He reveals himself through general revelation. He reveals himself through special revelation. The Bible, Jesus Christ. We could prove that the Bible itself, simply as a phenomenon, proves the existence of God. But that is not our approach in this discussion. I have showed that I have deduced from man himself the existence of God. Again, in Romans 1:18 and following, after Paul had made clear that the evidence of God is right before the eyes of everyone, his everlasting power and divinity are made known by the things that are. And so he said that man then can learn through general revelation. I believe that's just as true today as it was then. And Brother Warren, when he debates the atheist, believes it too. Because he argues that the existence of God is provable from nature, from the reality of the moral law, and the fact of conscience. And he proves the reality of moral law without any appeal to the Bible. And Brother Deaver said, it's written in the heart of man. Now, I don't believe it's intuitive. You might ask them what they believed it was. I simply believe this, that as from nature itself, which includes man, we can deduce the existence of God, that we can also detect the reality of moral law, that moral law is just as real as physical law. In my book, Communism and the Reality of Moral Law, I've dealt with this, and Brother Warren one time used it as a supplementary text in a class. That I believe that moral law is real as physical law, though not detectable by the same instruments. Thus, man can see the operation of these principles and can discern certain things are right and certain things are wrong. I don't think it's intuitive any more than the nature of belief in the existence of God is intuitive. Although it seems to me children, we might say, naturally come to faith in God, unless there are a lot of things to interfere with that. And that these principles that Paul spoke of in Romans 1:18 to 32 could be discerned by the pagans. I have a manuscript called The Law in the Heart. I've taken out of it all references except of quotations about how some of the pagans use it, divorce, because I'm not like the fellow that wherever they put him, he came to baptism. So they put him in Genesis 1, and he came to the Spirit of the Lord brooding upon the face of the deep, and that brought him to his subject baptism. Put him in the Sermon on the Mount, and he read until he got to straight is the way, and anybody knows that a straight is a narrow body of water, and that brought him to his subject baptism. So I'm not that disposition. But you can show that pagans recognized the reality of certain moral principles. And I've even found statements in Socrates and some others concerning the unwritten law of heaven. Paul spoke of how could the work of the law be in the heart of these individuals without the law in some sense working in their hearts. So I mean by what Brother Warren means by it when Brother Warren's arguing with the atheist. And if the general revelation has been abolished, you have no right to prove, to appeal, as a lot of our brethren do, to Romans 1 for the condemnation of certain things.
Keith Moore.
Brother Bales, I need to ask you this question in two parts because I need to know your answer to the first part. Did I understand you to say that Matthew 19:4-6 was not universal legislation of marriage?
I said that was God's original marriage law, that marriage is still ordained of God. For example, the Gentile, when the law of Moses was in force, was not dependent on a revelation in the law of Moses for marriage. Paul shows in Romans 1 that disobedience to parents was a sin of the Gentiles. You can't have parents without marriage. If God had permitted even for the Gentiles to be promiscuous, they wouldn't know who their parents were, who were not. So
Matthew 19:4-6 is universal legislation on marriage today.
Only with modification. No, I don't believe, because if it is, there's no divorce for anybody on any grounds. I believe you can appeal to Genesis 2 for the institution of marriage. I don't believe you can appeal to Genesis 2 for any divorce law.
Matthew 19:4-6 applies to a mixed marriage.
No.
In your
It,
book,
go ahead.
in your book on page 65,
Yeah.
I'm going to quote you.
Fine, great.
Bondage or slavery is not too strong a word to describe the marriage bond. God has not made any earthly bond stronger. It takes precedence over the relationship to parents, for one is to leave them and cleave to his wife. Matthew 19:5.
Yes, fine. I mentioned it.
Slave do not
Yeah.
become one flesh with the master, but wife and husband become one flesh. Matthew 19:5-6. Becoming one flesh with the harlot is condemned, and one is not to continue in it. 1 Corinthians 6:15-16. But one is supposed to be one flesh with one spouse. God joins them in marriage. Matthew 19:6. Down here at the bottom. It is so strong that the Christian is not to leave the non-Christian
Right.
who is content to dwell.
Yes.
1 Corinthians 7.
Right.
That's an inconsistency.
Well, no, I don't think it is. But if it is, on that page and the page before and the page after, I was dealing with the term bondage and showing it was not too strong a term to refer to marriage. Now then, if I slipped and used a passage to justify that, then I'd simply throw out that particular argument. It wouldn't destroy my case at all on bondage not being too strong a term. But I don't have to do that.
Isn't that the case, Brother Bale? That you have applied the passage on universal marriage to a mixed marriage, and you say does not apply.
No, I say, in the very nature of the case, God made male and female for marriage. And in the very nature of the case, marriage involves a one-flesh relationship. You can't have marriage without it. In the very nature of the case, they become one flesh. I believe that that's just as much in the nature of the case as it's not in the nature of the case to be homosexuals. Homosexuals is against nature. Now, I can appeal to God's original marriage law instituting marriage, and in the nature of the case, he made it a one-flesh relationship, and it's so much one that he even used that passage through Paul in 1 Corinthians 6:16 to condemn a one-flesh relationship with a harlot. They didn't marry the harlot, but it does show they became one body with the harlot. Now, I appeal to that, but I don't appeal, and you don't either, to the original marriage law to get a divorce law, because it's not there.
Brother Bales, did I hear you say a moment ago that it's possible that you slipped in that area?
I said if I did. I don't think I did, but if I did, I'd just throw that out. It doesn't hurt me to say I'm wrong on something.
I want to quote from page 9 of the book.
Yeah,
I want to emphasize that I have no uncertainty concerning the position set forth in this book.
that's right. Brother, sometimes there are arguments that are chain arguments. You break one link in the chain, you break the whole argument. On pages 65 through 66, I don't have a chain argument. I have several different arguments. A position may be held up by one argument. You may use 5 to hold it up. You may decide one was wrong. You can throw it out, and it doesn't destroy your case. I was debating a Baptist close to Jackson, Tennessee. And right in the middle of a point I was making on a passage, I saw the passage didn't apply. I dropped it. I said, this passage doesn't apply. I went on to others that did.
Which one of these have you thrown out, brother?
I haven't thrown out either one of them. But if I was going to, if I had been wrong on appealing to the original marriage law to show the very nature of marriage, then I'd throw those out under point 4 on page 65.
If that point is wrong,
Nothing.
you built your case upon
I didn't build my case on that. That's one argument. And
the word bondage. Is it possible at all that we still haven't found what that word means, even though you've written your book?
no, well, I wouldn't say I haven't written my book, therefore people have found it. No, I had more than one argument. That was, there were about 4 or 5 points under argument 4. So I could throw out that particular thing showing that bondage is not too strong a term and not affect my general argument there.
The question then follows, Brother Bales, when and how do we know if a man in the world is married?
When and how do we know? I suppose you know it the way you know anybody else is. They say intended to get married and had a one-flesh union.
But you said God joined them.
That's right. God joins them together in that one-flesh union.
And how does he do it?
Well, how did God join together the Gentile while the law of Moses was in force?
It is by practice the things contained in the law, Romans 2:14.
Okay, so that's a good answer. That's a good answer.
Well, how do I know it today if that man out there has no law from God?
I didn't. Well, he has the same law from God the Gentile had then, there you.
19:4 through 6?
No, you said the work of the law written in the heart.
I didn't say that. You said that.
I thought you said that we know that the Gentile during the time the law of Moses was in force, that was through the work of the law in the heart.
Hey, when and
Now,
how a man
but will you tell me how you can know a Gentile before the cross was joined in marriage by God, or do you believe they were?
Absolutely.
How do you know? How could you tell?
Jesus said so, and Genesis 2 said so.
Jesus said so. Was Jesus talking to the Gentile in Matthew 19? They weren't even discussing Gentiles in Matthew 19. So Genesis 2:24 is enough. But do you get your divorce law out of Genesis 2:24? Do you get your divorce law out of Genesis 2:24, Matthew 19:9? No.
Well, I do.
Out of Genesis 2:24, find it for me.
But my question still remains, how do you know when a man in the world is married?
How do I know John's married to his wife?
John's a Christian.
Well, how do I know? How do you know a Christian's married? You have to take the word for it. Yeah, I'm a Christian. I don't know what John meant.
We see here then is that we have a ridiculous position, Brother Bales.
No.
We assume that Matthew 94:6 is not universal legislation. Because we can banner it back and forth.
Well, okay, you take it as universal legislation and making the divorce law too. You haven't got a right for anybody to divorce remarriage. You haven't even got a right for remarriage at the point of death of one of the spouses. You find it there. Find it there.
Let's give room for somebody else to ask a question.
I say God, now, for example, in the days of Abraham, God still recognized marriage. But at the same time, he recognized divorce. He had Abraham to send away Hagar. And if I didn't divorce it, it may not have been registered in the local courts, but it sure did an effective job of it. Yes.
Well, Bales, the world is not under Matthew 19:9, and you state that Matthew 19:9 is a covenant passage
That's right.
relating only to Christians married to Christians.
That's right.
Then what is the world under? You're going to say the law on their heart.
Romans 1:18 to 2:14.
When a Baptist preacher preaches the doctrine of faith only, is he sinning when he preaches that doctrine?
I'm glad you asked that question. Brother Warren wrote a book called Keeping the Lock in Wedlock. He devoted, maybe he mentions it some other places too, but he devoted about 16 pages of 1 Corinthians 7:10 to 16. I've been very disappointed in that most of my critics talk about something else than my arguments on those passages. I don't say all of them. In this, Brother Warren thinks there are certain things implied in my position. And so then he lists 26 things that I teach. Well, I said, I believe one of them. And he said, I didn't say you believed them. I said, you taught them by implication. I believe in holding a man to the implications of his position. He should either give up the position if he doesn't like the implications, or prove that the implications don't follow. Now, the assumption is that if a man is not under the covenant, he's not under any law at all from God, not amenable to God. Well, now, if the aliens are under the covenant, then the aliens are obligated to give. And I want to know when, after some brethren have examined a couple of aliens, and incidentally, brethren, why some brethren get so excited about my position when I'm defending what most brethren are practicing is a little strange to me. That doesn't prove it's right. But at any rate, after you examine his marriage, I want you to examine his bank account. Why hasn't he been giving? And if he's stolen, why doesn't he restore? And I want to know why you don't make him pay up before you baptize him. He might break up his bank account. If you want to break up his marriage, I wouldn't worry about his bank account. Why didn't Paul say disfellowship the disorderly in the world, or the people he described in 1 Corinthians 5? So you just can't put everybody under the covenant. Now then.
The Baptist preacher sinned when
No.
he preaches the
Now, I'm coming to that. Yeah, I'll do it in my own good time. What I'm saying is that the assumption is, I want to get that background to get in to recognize that Brother Warren's made the same argument. It assumes that a man has to be under covenant law in a covenant relationship with God in order to sin. That's not true. One doesn't have to be under covenant relationship with God in order to sin. Now then, when the serpent came to Eve, the serpent was not in covenant relationship with God, Eve was. Oh, it doesn't say covenant in Genesis 2 and Genesis 1, but they were in covenant relationship with God. It was wrong for the devil, through the serpent, and for the serpent, to deny what God said, whether that was addressed to the serpent or not, and whether the serpent was under a covenant relationship with God. In the nature of the case, God is God, man is creature. And in the nature of the case, when God speaks, no man, whether he's in covenant relationship with God or not, has a right to contradict God. And so then God condemned the false prophets in the land into which Israel went, in the land of Palestine. They weren't in covenant relationship with God, but when one presumes to speak in God's name and to represent what God said and misrepresent what God said, that's sinful, and you don't have to be in a covenant relationship with God to do it. How could you condemn it was wrong. The aliens were not under the law that Israel was under with reference to not marrying outside the covenant, outside the race, outside the people. And yet it was wrong for them to try to persuade Israelites to marry them. It would be wrong for them to try to say, here, we've got something set up just as good as what goes on in Jerusalem. You don't have to be under covenant relationship in order for it to be wrong to deceive people. Romans 1 shows that deception is wrong. And to teach contrary to what God has taught is to deceive people. And deception is wrong whether you're in the covenant or not.
Now I want to ask you a question. Don't get so excited. We'll stand and together.
I get excited. Got to speak so the people can hear me over the Coke machine. I think it's a good idea, by the way, to keep the Coke machines off forever.
Two aliens come into my office to counsel, premarital counseling.
Mm-hmm.
Should I use Matthew 19, 1 through 9, Matthew 5:32 to counsel them, or what passage should I use?
Well, what do they want to be counseled about?
By getting married.
By getting married.
Whether they can get married or not.
Well, I never advised
anybody. Remarry?
Yeah, I never advised anybody to get married. First of all, number one. I know that doesn't answer the question, but I wanted to know I never advised anyone. Second, I couldn't use Matthew 19, 1 to 9. Couldn't use all that.
Any of it?
I could appeal to the fact that God gave marriage in the beginning. God never recognized sex out of marriage. Adultery was, for example, 1 Corinthians 6, 9 to 11. We find that before they'd been converted, and that certainly would include what some of them had done before the gospel came, before they were converted, adultery was possible. As a general rule, the term adultery is used with reference to the violation of a marriage bond, and so adultery was wrong amongst the Gentiles, so the marriage bond was recognized amongst the Gentiles. You couldn't have had it being wrong to be disobedient to parents who weren't. So I'd say, yes, God instituted marriage in the beginning, and God has never sanctioned sex out of marriage. But that is not to say that God has not regulated marriage differently at different times. He certainly did under the law of Moses. Moses didn't institute marriage, Brother John. Moses didn't make marriage right. And Moses' legislation for Israel didn't make it right for the Gentiles. Christ didn't institute marriage. Christ didn't make marriage right for people outside the covenant. It was always right for people outside the covenant. Now, I think you ought to marry for keeps. I did 40 years ago. And my wife never even threatened to go back to her mother if she had. I'd have packed and gone with her. Both lived off mother. Yeah, but now, if they had been divorced and remarried, now then, if you were on Pentecost, Brother Warren said, go ahead and divorce and remarry if it happened before Pentecost. And Brother Mike Deaver said, if it happened before AD 62 or 63 and before the gospel became accessible to them, well, you go ahead and marry. So you ought to marry.
Suppose I didn't know Brother Mike Deaver, brother.
It's all right. I just use what I've been talking about on the
You
scripture.
wouldn't use Matthew 19:9 or 5:32 at all.
No.
Well, what passage would you use to tell them that they're all right and they have the right to marry if they've both been divorced 3 times?
Oh, let's make it 100 times. People like big numbers. Let me ask you this. If they'd come to you and they'd just been shacking up, and they'd shacked up with 99 different people down the line, you'd say they're all right if they've repented, they get married, wouldn't you? Fornication for the unmarried doesn't disqualify them.
If they brought forth fruit meet for repentance.
How would you test that fruit?
Repentance.
How do you know they're
Turn away
repentant? Well, you can't even know that. You assume they do, and we hope they do.
Well, I took your word that you've been married 40 years.
Yeah, well, that's right. At any rate, I'd marry them because Paul said, to the marriage say I, to the marriage say I. Here it is. To the marriage say I. Not the, to marriage, I say not I, but the Lord. And he's talking there to 2 believers. Now, Brother Warren realized this until 2 years ago. So did Brother Roy. So did most brethren. Now, the reason I says 2 Christians is because in 7:12, the Apostle Paul said to the rest, say I, not the Lord. Now, brethren, if the Lord spoke on all marriages in Matthew 19:9, he spoke on 2 Christians, 2 aliens, and a mixed marriage. And if he spoke on all marriages, he spoke on mixed marriages. And the same thing is said in 7:10 would have been said to the mixed marriages. Now, in the 2 Christians in 7:10, he said, don't divorce. And even if they divorced, he didn't permit it. He said, if you divorce, remain unmarried to be reconciled. But in 7:12, he said to the Christian, now if they're content to dwell with you, that's the only condition he laid down for the unbeliever. If you can, and the unbeliever, only thing he said about the unbeliever on that at that point, dwell with them. Then he said, if the unbeliever departs or divorces, let him divorce, let him depart. And Brother Floyd and Brother Warren say on page 217, I believe it is, of charts, that this was a permissive imperative. He permitted, the Holy Spirit permitted in that case what he didn't permit in 7:10.
Now, you say
So then
1 7, 10, 11 is what is passed out.
2 Christians.
What would you do when they got
No,
out to
I-
39 and ask you about that?
Well, that's a good, we're on 7:39.
You know, what if they ask you about, well, now this says for a woman is bound to her husband as long as he lives.
Yeah, okay, fine.
And I've had 3
All right.
husbands.
Well, what would you say to them if they all 3 husbands been divorced for fornication?
What would I say?
Yeah.
Well, I'd use Matthew 19.
I see. You wouldn't stay with 1 Corinthians 7:39.
I haven't been there. I just say, you've been
No.
to 1 Corinthians.
No,
I asked you what passage you use.
So I went to, I'm going glad to 1 Corinthians 7:39. Now then, 1 Corinthians 7:39 is talking to a Christian woman. Do you tell people in the world that they're to marry only in the Lord? Now, I know some people how they explain that, but I agree with most brethren that means for to marry a Christian. Now then, do you tell people in the world to marry only in the Lord, only marry a Christian? Well, then, if that's true, then you got to tell some people who are Christians they got to marry somebody outside the Lord. So 1 Corinthians 7:39 is the general statement talking about a Christian. He doesn't refer to fornication because that evidently wasn't a subject under consideration there.
What law was he referring to in verse 39?
The law that bound them together till death, or
What law?
Matthew 19, the law of Christ.
Law of the land, too?
No, I don't remember
I
that.
don't let me see. Right, Jerry, you had your hand up.
Yes, I wanted to ask for Bales. So many times when you're studying with someone outside, you're trying to win them to Christ, you run into the question of divorce.
Yes.
But in so many cases, one of them has been a member of the church at that time. Now then, what does the position you have do in a situation like that? I'd say so many cases, that come to us in the congregation are people where one of these has been baptized in Christ. And yet,
What do you know about the circumstance of divorce? Did the unbeliever desert her or divorce her or
what I'm saying is that this one person or the other the other one, one or the other, has divorced on unscriptural violation of Matthew 19. It would not coincide with Matthew 19. Let's say the believer did it. He did it in such a way that it violated Matthew 19. Now he's married. He's married this innocent party out here. What does this do to them?
Well, are we ready to get off of 1 Corinthians 7?
This one is
this is another.
a practical.
I know what I'm talking about. I mean, some said we get on to the question of, you're talking about the remarriage of a guilty party or what?
Yes. Well, in either case, there's probably an innocent party and a guilty party involved there. And let's say the guilty party is somebody who has been baptized into Christ before.
They were put away because of fornication. They were put away because of fornication. Well, you say the guilty party was baptized into Christ.
Let's say in my case, if I went out and divorced my wife, and I married some innocent young lady out here, and I divorced my wife because I just couldn't stand it. And because she wouldn't take care of my clothes, wouldn't take care of my house. And I married this young lady, and she gives me all the appreciation and everything. Now then, I come to you, and I say, Brother Bales, I used to be a member of the church, but I got away from it. And now I found somebody I love. We both love each other. We want to be Christians. We want to straighten up our lives. Now, she's never been baptized before, but now she wants to be. I've sort of taught her myself. What do I do?
Then we've addressed the question of the alien. We're not even discussing the question of the guilty party. As I understand, we aren't discussing that. Your wife didn't put you away because of fornication. You put her away because you didn't like it. I'd say, first of all, if at all possible, you ought to go back to the first marriage. That may be impossible. She won't take you back. She won't have you.
We have two new children.
Okay, fine. You can't restore the first marriage. I am one who believes in a very dangerous doctrine, the doctrine of forgiveness. And I believe that you can get forgiven for one sin there as easy as you can for two. What do I mean by that? I mean that brethren, some deny it, but the brethren will say, and I agree with them. And by the way, I mentioned different brethren believe in certain things. I'll tell you why. Because I want brethren to recognize that if they're going to start drawing lines of fellowship, I want them to be consistent. I want them to be consistent. You can't take out me on 1 Corinthians 7:12 and leave in for Wallace. That doesn't prove I'm right or wrong. But I am saying let's be consistent. Now, what did you decide? Well, I'll do like David, I'll shoot her, the first wife. Then you have no wife. Brother Waldron in his debate with Brother Hicks indicated murder could be forgiven. More than one brother says that. You might say, well, he premeditated. Well, can premeditated murder? It might be harder to repent. So then, if you killed her, then you wouldn't have to worry about the second marriage. So I believe the second one, that one sin, the sin of an unlawfully breaking up a marriage, and the other sin of unlawfully entering a marriage, that you can be forgiven for that. Now then, for example, and again I'll quote a brother. Now I'm telling you why I'm quoting Tennessee Bible College, because some have attacked Harding College because I've been there on my position, and have tried to pressure people there, and have tried to keep students from going there. And I'm not there now. I retired December the 31st, 1980. I don't even use Harding College stationery.
Thank you for tuning into our video. If you like this content and you want to see more of it, be sure to leave a like on the video, share it with a friend, and leave a comment telling us how you liked the video. And be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content like this. Also, be sure to give us a follow on Facebook, where we share lots of our content and we make many other posts over there. We're also on TikTok, and so if you want to follow us there, we're on there as well. All right, I hope everyone has a great day.